Hello, everybody. Right, I'm going to read from Judges 6, starting at verse 7. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the God of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me." And then verse 36. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. But this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. So, Gideon, probably a lesser known character. Definitely not the first person who springs to mind when you think of Bible stories. But when people ask me, and James asked me the other day, "Who's your favourite person in the Bible?" I always say Gideon. Why? Because I think he's really relatable. Or at least I've related to him in many ways at different points in my life. I'm going to be looking at a bit of an overview of Gideon's life, and some bits weren't mentioned in the passage, but his story spans 3 chapters, and that's a lot to read on a Sunday morning, so we had to just cut it down for the highlights. So you can go home later and read the rest if you want to. So the first thing that I always find kind of funny, kind of interesting, relatable, was that Gideon was hiding in a wine press, threshing his wheat when God visited him. Now, a wine press, as the name suggests, was not where wheat threshing normally happened. From what I gather, it's like a sunken, built-out pit that would hold all the grapes that they then got pushed down, and it would turn into wine. Whereas wheat threshing, as I understand, normally happens out in the open, up on a hill, so that the wind will blow away all the bits of wheat that you don't want. So here's Gideon making his job both more difficult and, well, it's kind of a bit humiliating, just hiding out in this little hole. And why is he doing that? Because he's scared. The Midianites are on the prowl, constantly coming down, attacking and stealing the wheat once it's finished. So Gideon's hiding, trying to avoid confrontation and staying below the radar. And how many times has that been us? How many times does God find us in hiding, going about our day-to-day, but in the shadows, trying to stay out of sight, worried about all the world around us, not wanting to stand out or draw attention to ourselves or our calling? I know for me personally, there's been many times where I've thought, if I just keep quiet, God won't ask me to do anything. Maybe he'll just pass me by and move on to the next person. He won't ask me to go out there and do something. He'll find someone else, someone who's better suited. Or maybe it's that you do want to go out there and do stuff, but you don't feel like you can. For whatever reason, something keeps you hiding in that wine press because everything feels too scary. Sometimes those things are tangible things, but sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they aren't things that you can see or quantify, but they're no less real. We never know the individual obstacles that someone else is facing. But the thing with Gideon is that whilst he's hiding, so no one can see him, there is still one person who does. God. God sees him. God sees him and chooses him for his mission. Which leads very nicely into the next thing of God says to him, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now you can probably imagine Gideon getting quite startled by this arrival of a visitor while he's hiding out in a hole, and probably spinning around assuming that he's addressing someone else. He's probably like, surely you can't mean me. I'm basically a nobody. Although interestingly, the first thing he actually says to God is, "If you're with us, why is all this terrible stuff happening?" And how relatable is that question? God, if you're with us, if you're with me, why does it feel like you aren't? Why am I struggling? Why am I hurting? Why do I look around at the world and see so much pain? When I have conversations with people at work or friends who don't have faith, the big thing they say to me is, how can there be a God when the world is so broken and full of suffering? And there are, of course, many answers to that question. Some are helpful, some are not. But the point here is I think it's okay to be honest with God and say, where are you? Because it doesn't feel like you're here with me. Why is all this awful and difficult stuff going on? God can take it. He's a big guy. He wants us to be honest with him, and the truth is, he knows what we're thinking and feeling anyway, so you might as well just say it. And God's response to Gideon and to us is, I hear you. I've heard all of you crying out, and I'm sending you, so go in strength and save your people. And Gideon's probably there like, that's not quite what I had in mind. And he comes back round to when God called him a mighty warrior and says, are you sure you mean me? Because my family's like the smallest family in all the tribe, and to top that off, I'm the least in my family. You can't possibly mean me. And I relate to this on a personal level because I come from a very large family. I'm the youngest of 7 siblings. And I couldn't even tell you how many times I've thought my older siblings would be better at this. I'll never be like them. I'll never be as cool as them, as smart, as talented, as able to do all this cool stuff. And the amount of times I heard growing up, you're too little to do this. You can't come with us. You're too young. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my siblings greatly. And it wasn't that they fundamentally thought they were better than me. Or at least I hope not. My brother is here today, so you can ask him later. But comparison is the thief of joy, isn't it? I moved to Devon 5 years ago this month, and I came here to do children's work in Crediton, and I remember talking to my mum in the application process and sharing my doubts in my capabilities, and that maybe I wasn't good enough. And I remember her saying to me, which of your siblings do you actually think would be better at this than you? And I didn't really have a good answer for her at the time, or now. We so easily discount our own gifts and talents as individuals and as the wider church. We discredit what we can do and the impact we can have on the world around us. We think we're too small. We think we're too insignificant. But aren't those the exact people that God chooses to use the most? It's not about how we see ourselves. It's about how God sees us. God addressed Gideon as a mighty warrior. He was speaking out of who he saw Gideon to be, not who Gideon saw himself to be. Don't discredit yourselves, because God will and does use you in bigger ways than you could imagine. When I moved to Devon and left where I'd been living in Wiltshire, some friends gave me this bookmark. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "Though she be but little, she is fierce." And I brought it with me as a reminder from God too, that I could do this. Because it isn't how I see myself that matters, it's how God sees me. I've never actually used it as a bookmark, but it does hang in my room so that on the days that I doubt myself and doubt my ability to have an impact or be of any importance in God's plan and his kingdom, I can look at that bookmark and remind myself that I might be little, but I am fierce. And God uses me in spite of my insecurities and doubts, despite my failings and mistakes, and that's what really matters. And if you take nothing else away from today, I urge you, and I hope that you walk out of here with a little bit more self-confidence, knowing that God sees you as a mighty warrior and chooses you. God tells Gideon he's going to deliver his people. He's going to defeat the enemy. And understandably, Gideon has some questions and some doubts. And he wants to be really, really sure that he's heard correctly and that God will stand true to his promise. So he says, "Look, God, if you really mean it, give me a sign. Give me some reassurance. I'm going to leave this wool fleece out tonight. And if your promise is true, when I wake up in the morning, let the ground be completely dry and the fleece wet." God's like, okay. So Gideon leaves the fleece out, and sure enough, when he gets up in the morning, the ground is dry and the fleece is wet. He's able to wring out a bowl full of dew. So you can imagine Gideon's like, oh no, I actually have to do this. So he drags his feet a little bit and says, okay, God, don't be mad, but can I just ask one more thing? I'm going to leave the fleece out again, but this time I want the fleece to be dry and the ground covered in dew. And in my mind's eye, I sort of picture God giving a little bit of an eye roll, but sweetly humouring Gideon and saying, okay, if that's what you need. So Gideon leaves this fleece out again, gets up in the morning, and what do you know? The ground is wet, the fleece is completely dry. And so Gideon goes and does what God has asked him to. Can any of you think of times where you've put out the proverbial fleece to God? Because the truth is, we all want reassurance, don't we? We all want to be sure before we put ourselves out there and potentially make a fool of ourselves. And I have one really clear example of when I put the fleece out. After I graduated and I spent a year volunteering with the Christian Union in Swansea, and then after that, I spent 9 months living in America with my brother and his family. He was a youth pastor at the time, and I spent those months doing youth work with him, which I absolutely loved. Unfortunately, my visa did not allow me to stay in America forever, so I had to come back. But my plan was, I'm going to find a job for the summer, I'm going to get a visa, and I'm going to go back to America permanently. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do youth work. So I'd been home a couple of weeks, and my mum said she'd spoken to my aunt, and that the cafe in the Abbey, near where they lived, was looking to hire someone. So I thought, sure, I'll give it a go. So I applied, and then I went up to stay with my aunt and uncle and to have an interview. And I got there, and within about, let's say, half an hour of arriving, I was like, I don't want to do this. But I'm here, so I'll interview anyway, and let's hope they don't offer me the job, because I don't want to live in Wiltshire. I just don't want to. So I went in, had a chat with with the manager of the cafe, and of course they offered me the job right there and then. So I went back to my aunt and uncle's, and I thought, no, I really can't do this. I don't want to do this. I want to go back to Wales, and mostly I want to be in America. So I went downstairs and I told my aunt that I wasn't going to take the job, and I'd go and tell them the next day. She was disappointed, but was like, okay, if that's what you want to do. And I just had this knot in my stomach. You know that feeling when you really have to do something, but you really don't want to do it? And I had this feeling that working in this cafe, for whatever reason, was maybe where I needed to be. But I just really didn't want to do it. And I'm not joking, I could barely sleep all night, tossing, turning, feeling sick to my stomach. And eventually I said, look, God, I feel like this is where you want me to be, but I just can't do it, and I don't want to do it. So I'm going to say no. But if this is really, really, really where you want me to be, you're just going to have to step in and do something when I tell them no. You know, one of those conversations that you have with God that you always think is going to work in your favor. So the next day, still with this knot in my stomach, I walked into that cafe and I saw the manager, and I said to her, you know, I'm really grateful for the offer, and it was fun doing a trial shift with you, but I'm going to say no, but thank you anyway. And she looked at me, barely skipped a beat, and said, okay, I'll take that, but I want you to go home and think about it for a week. And if you don't change your mind, that's fine, but if you do, call me. And in that exact moment, I thought, rats. And I knew I'd be working in that cafe. Of course, I went home and I took the entire week to tell them that I was coming back to work with them. And I said to God, it's only for 4 months, okay? It's for 4 months and then I am gone. But he had other plans and I was there for 14 months. And the manager says she honestly has no idea where it came from to say that. We laughed a lot about it in later months. She became a mentor to me and is pretty much the reason I ended up in Devon, because she encouraged me to apply for the job here in Crediton. So you're all welcome to her. She always used to say to me, you are far too important and have far too much to do in God's kingdom to sit in my cafe forever. God came through for me with his plan, even if it was completely different to my plan. And I wouldn't change it for the world. Devon has become my home, and the church family that I've found here is invaluable. And I've been so incredibly blessed and learnt so much about myself and about God. And God's promise rang true for Gideon too. And I know there are several other steps in his story and more forcing Gideon to trust God before he leads the Israelites to victory. But God was faithful to his promise and faithful to what he called Gideon to do. Now, I don't think that we should test God, but I think it's okay to ask for reassurance, and is actually quite wise to do so. It can be easy to think that something is God, and maybe it isn't. And there are ways to get reassurance. Ask God, for one. Have a whole conversation about fleeces. But talk to others you trust as well and say, look, what do you think about this? And also go back to God's word too, because he speaks to us through that. So firstly, God sees us, even when we're hiding. Secondly, he hears us and he chooses us and he sends us because he sees our potential, not how we see ourselves. And finally, he reassures us and he always comes through for us on his promises. So I hope you take encouragement from this, that no matter how insignificant or unprepared you feel, God has chosen you for great things. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you see us as mighty warriors, that you see us as far more than how we see ourselves. And thank you that you choose us, even when we wouldn't choose ourselves. I pray that this week as we go out, you would help us to see a little bit more clearly how you see us and live a bit more in that knowledge and in that truth and walk a little higher knowing that. Give us your strength and give us faith to trust you when you call. Amen.